Today you are Dwight Eisenhower, Republican president elected in 1952. You were elected primarily because you guided American forces and Allied forces to victory in World War II in Europe. You're one of the great war heroes of the Second World War. And you've fallen into the tradition of American generals who become president. So this is the main reason you were elected in 1952. There was a second reason. It was something that you said late in the campaign while American forces were still fighting in Korea. You said that you were going to go to Korea. I will go to Korea, you said. And you didn't say exactly what you were going to do in Korea, but it gave the impression that you were going to solve the Korean problem. The Korean problem for the United States was that American forces were fighting in Korea against originally against a communist invasion from North Korea, but now American forces were fighting against Chinese troops in Korea. And a stalemate had developed, and there seemed to be no end to the conflict. So you said you were going to go to Korea and you were going to solve the problem there. So it's 1953. It's in the early part of 1953, and the Korean War is working its way toward an armistice. This is not a peace treaty. It's not really a final settlement of anything, but it's going to stop the fighting. Meanwhile, trouble has been developing. Trouble, interpreted from an American standpoint, has been developing in Iran, a country in the Middle East that shares a border with the Soviet Union, but also goes down to the Persian Gulf. Persia was the traditional name for Iran. And there's a lot of oil in the Persian Gulf, and this is a sensitive issue in the emerging Cold War. Will Europe, will eventually the United States have access to the oil of the Middle East? And you are concerned because there is a popularly elected prime minister in Iran, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, who, to your perception, seems to be playing a little bit too cozy with a communist party in Iran. And you fear that the Communist Party in Iran will form an alliance with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the communists will take over Iran. Now, you are fully aware of the Truman Doctrine that said that the United States would resist the takeover of non-communist countries by communist forces. And so you buy into this. You don't want this to happen. On the other hand, you don't want another war on your hands, because there's a war in Korea, and this has become pretty unpopular. So using the military as a device for stopping communist expansion, for enforcing the containment policy of the Truman administration, the military, that just doesn't strike you as the best use of the military, and you have a particular expertise in this because you're the general. So here's the situation. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, created a few years before, has proposed a plan where the United States, agents of the United States, will contact people in Iran, and this in conjunction with the British Secret Services, will contact friendly, that is pro-American groups in Iran, and stage a kind of coup. Some violence will probably involve some riots and all that sort of thing, but definitely not a military operation. And it will overthrow the government of Iran. Now, I have to point out that this government of Iran has been elected. It has the legitimacy of election. So you could simply just wait around and see if the government's going to get thrown out of power by elective means. But you're worried that if you wait, the communists might take over. The communists might get elected. And the trouble with communist parties getting elected is the door only works one way. They get in, but then they don't hold another election, and then they don't get out, don't move out. And Iran then will be lost to the free world the way China was lost to the free world, and North Korea, and maybe Korea, if the United States hadn't intervened there. So the CIA has this plan, and the plan is to stage a coup to overthrow the Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and install, or actually sort of reinstall, a friendly figure, the Shah of Iran. So, Mr. President, Dwight Eisenhower, what are you going to do? Are you going to give the green light to the CIA and say, okay, go ahead, do your stuff? I'll tell you what your predecessor had concluded on this. The same proposal had been put to Harry Truman. And Harry Truman said, no. Harry Truman didn't want to do it because he didn't like the idea of a CIA. He didn't like the idea of a spy service. He was afraid that the CIA was going to become an American version of Gestapo or Soviet secret police. And he thought that a democracy was no place for something like this. So he refused. He refused the go-ahead. Well, the CIA decided to bide its time, wait for another opportunity. You are the other opportunity. So what do? I'll tell you that the attractions are, and you know this through your own experience in World War II, that you worked with the predecessor of the CIA, something called the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. And the OSS engaged in what then was called psychological warfare, basically disinformation and propaganda and stuff like this to soften the enemy's resistance. And you thought, this is a really good thing because as a general, you were aware that when you send in the military, lots of people die. And if you could send in the spooks, the spies, then maybe you could save some lives. So this was really important. One of the things about you as president, as a general who became president, you know what the military is good for and what the military is not good for. And you've seen that you're not happy with the way things are turning out in Korea. It's maybe better than if South Korea had become communist, but the idea of these sort of partial wars, that they don't sit well with the American public, and it's just, it tends to demoralize the military. So you're not going to send troops into Iran. On the other hand, you don't want to see Iran go communist. And so this idea of using the secret agents to engage in covert warfare is very appealing. So what do? Well, in fact, here's what you do. You give them the go-ahead. And in fact, the operation to overthrow Mossadegh and to reinstall the Shah of Iran succeeds. And to you, this looks like, boy, this is a really good deal. We've saved Iran from communism, and we've prevented the expansion of Soviet influence toward the Persian Gulf. In fact, you are so happy with the outcome of the operation in Iran that you give the go-ahead to the CIA to do something similar in Guatemala, very much closer to home, in Central America. And the CIA does something similar in Guatemala and overthrows the government there, installing an America-friendly group of generals. And so, 1953, 1954, the CIA, good stuff. Now, I wouldn't be entirely honest if I didn't tell you what happened afterwards. In the case of Guatemala, the installation of the generals, again, overthrowing an elected government, touched off a civil war in Guatemala that lasted many years and claimed many thousands of lives. So you have to presumably count that as a debit. In the case of Iran, the Shah of Iran, who governed from 1953, you helped him get back into power, until 1979 when he was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution, at which time the Iranian revolutionaries remembered that the United States was complicit in putting the Shah into power. And so the revolution against the Shah in 1979 was as much a revolution against the United States. Now here I have to say something, that these operations were called covert operations. Sometimes covert is seen as a synonym for secret. Well, that's not quite true, because in Iran it was very well known that the United States was involved in this, and the British as well. And so many Iranians felt that their country had been manipulated by these foreign powers, and resentment developed over time against the Shah as this American stooge. Now, from the American standpoint, the Shah wasn't entirely a stooge. He had his own mind, did his own stuff. But nonetheless, when the revolutionary fervor developed against the Shah in the late 1970s, it was equally targeted against the United States. And that anti-American feeling gave rise to the anti-Americanism that has inspired the Iranian Revolution and the revolutionaries ever since. So in 1953, Mr. President Eisenhower, you're probably not thinking that far down the road, but maybe you should be.